Hello students, welcome to the lecture on business strategies for sustainable development, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain the implication for business and practical consideration. Describe the enhancing management system. Discuss the design and execute and implementation plan. Explain the supportive corporate culture and standards of performance. Describe the prepare reports and enhance internal monitoring processes. Explain the management, leadership and deciding on a strategy. Discuss small business and private company consideration. Business sustainability is becoming increasingly important for managers in the modern economy. Business sustainability can be described as a holistic continuous improvement process that includes the sound management of people and the environment. Business sustainability makes good business sense because the benefits feed directly back into the bottom line. Rather than being just another thing to do, business sustainability as often urging concept that involves doing everything better and more efficiently. True sustainability must be integrated into all operation of business, from policy and management through to on-ground activities such as purchasing, production and distribution. Sustainable development for Shell means balancing short and long-term interests in a way that allows us to integrate economic, environmental and social consideration into the business decision. It underpins how we develop and operate the projects and facilities and the way to manage supply chains. We are growing our production for the future by finding and developing additional natural gas and oil resources.
We've been working with business and manufacturing in China, seeing the change in attitudes towards sustainability. People want to know if business really can prosper by going sustainable, or if this is all just wishful thinking. Everything we've seen has convinced us that business really can lead the way. The ones that really embrace sustainability are showing us how it's done. But to understand where we're headed, we need to look back and see how far we've come, and how far we have yet to go. Before we set off, let's just get one thing out of the way. It's this word sustainable, since we'll be using it a lot. Really what it means is not unsustainable, not the end of the world. So it means we're not using up all the stuff on Earth, we're not covering it in waste that never goes away, and we're making life better for people, not worse. That's a good journey for business to be on. After all, we invented business to make our lives better. Our journey starts back in the 1800s, at the start of the Industrial Revolution. Back then we wouldn't call it a journey to sustainability. It looked more like a war between industry and the environment. Coal was burned freely with no filters, and the air in the industrial cities in Europe and America became increasingly gray. Unconstrained by any environmental laws, industry continued to release more air and water pollution every year for 100 years. By the middle of the 20th century, the levels of pollution were jaw-dropping. In December of 1952, London was hit by the Great Smog, when the pollution was so heavy that within days it had killed 4,000 people and sickened over 100,000. Meanwhile, the United States experienced similar smog events, as well as uncontrolled water pollution. The Cuyahoga River in Ohio oozed black with pollution, and when the river caught fire in 1969, for the 13th time, it finally drew attention to the condition of the rivers. Citizens had had enough, and demanded that environmental laws be passed. Britain and America soon passed their first Clean Air Acts and Clean Water Acts to regulate the worst of the abuses. Industry was forced to pay for pollution damages and install expensive pollution treatment equipment. Companies who failed to comply with the laws were shut down or forced to pay fines, and their profits plummeted. A lot of them started moving their production to factories in China and developing countries, where environmental laws were less strictly enforced. It became clear to everyone in business that protecting the environment was a cost, plain and simple. So the battle lines were drawn, with business on one side and environment on the other. Would we always be forced to choose between the two? The laws did help the environment a little, at least in the developed countries, but the story doesn't stop there. There was another movement in the 60s that brought conditions to a head. Cheap production had already gotten ahead of what people even wanted, so they needed a way to increase demand. Advertisers and marketers put their heads together and consumerism was born. More and more cheaper products appeared on the market, designed to last for short times so more could be sold. Production increased, and with so much of the manufacturing already happening in countries with little environmental enforcement, environmental impacts got worse, not better. One multinational company set up a chemical plant in Bhopal, India, ignoring safety regulations and working with oversized tanks of deadly poisonous chemicals next to the homes of 1 million people. Late one night in 1984, a tank ruptured, releasing the toxic chemicals into the air of the city. Panic broke out as people woke up in clouds of poisonous gases that burned their lungs and killed 20,000 people. It became clear that government regulations alone would never be enough. Businesses had to find their own reasons for pursuing sustainability. One reason was that energy and resources started to get expensive. In 1973, war broke out in the Middle East. Oil-producing nations closed the pipelines, and gas tanks around the world hovered on empty. People waited in line at gas pumps for hours, only to find the pumps empty by the time the line finished. Oil prices shot up to 4 times the original price and stayed there for a decade. The stock markets crashed, and business ground to a halt. Today, the oil prices are even higher. It was a wake-up call. Some companies realized they could save money by using less energy and materials for their products and services. These companies were starting out on a new stage of the journey by choosing to do more for the environment than the law required. They were taking their first, cautious steps towards sustainability. We call them the tiptoers. Saving money wasn't the only reason. Companies also had their reputation to think about. If people believed the company was helping out in their community, making safe and healthy products, and treating their workers fairly, it would improve their reputation and give them more customers. If people felt the company was poisoning the environment, using dangerous chemicals in their products, and abusing workers, they would look bad and lose customers. Since so many companies had already moved their factories overseas, there was nobody to police them, so the corporations were responsible to police themselves. They called this corporate social responsibility. So they made a special new department in the company, the Corporate Social Responsibility Department, and gave them the job of making the company socially responsible. The CSR departments did great work, donating money to build schools, contributing to local charities, organizing community events, and tree planting. All good news. The only problem was, it wasn't really helping that much. Sure, the companies were saving a bit of energy here and there, but that was never going to get them off fossil fuels entirely for truly sustainable energy, not to mention dealing with waste, toxics, or labor issues. And the CSR departments couldn't help much, since they were separate from most business operations. So while the CSR departments were off planting trees, the rest of the company was doing business as usual. And they weren't even breaking even on the money they were paying for CSR. When they asked hundreds of tiptoer companies about it, less than a quarter said their sustainability investments were paying off. So far, the sustainability journey wasn't looking so good. If it just meant companies changing their light bulbs and planting a few trees, it wasn't ever going to get us anywhere, and it wasn't even making money, so companies might as well save themselves the trouble. So is our journey towards sustainability over? Not quite. You see, all those problems that made us care about sustainability in the first place haven't gone away. In fact, they're getting worse, and more people are starting to pay attention. First, the governments are still pushing companies, and the regulations keep getting stricter, even for companies that moved all their factories overseas. When European regulations required electronics companies to recycle their products when people finish with them, that affected every company that wants to sell in the EU, even if they're from China or America. Second, the investors are getting involved. If a company is about to get fined by the government for pollution, or have its reputation ruined because of an environmental scandal, the investors could lose a lot of money, so they want to know the risks. The Carbon Disclosure Project pushes companies to disclose their climate change risks, and it has a lot of muscle behind it. It represents investors with $71 trillion under management. That's more money than the entire world's GDP in 2010. Third, employees want to work for companies they can believe in. The best job candidates are now looking very carefully at companies' sustainability track records. After all, if you got good enough grades in school to choose the company you worked for, which one would you choose? And most importantly, consumers care more than ever about buying from companies that do the right thing. Many of them care not only about product quality and personal health effects, but about the impact of the company on the environment and society. Marketers have come up with a name for this segment. They call it LOHAS, Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability, and it has become a major influence on how companies market their products. In this new landscape, some companies see sustainability as essential for being competitive. They pursue it not only for cost savings and improving their reputation, but they're going further, embracing sustainability as part of their core business strategy. Because they're consistently walking the walk and not just talking about it, we call them the marchers. Instead of just making sustainability the job of the CSR department, they get the whole company involved, from the CEO all the way down. Whenever they make a business decision, the impacts of that decision on the environment and community are included. The marchers know that sustainability can help them attract the best employees and challenge those employees to come up with new and better ways of doing things. And this innovation can win the company new customers and expand market share. Sometimes these benefits can be hard to predict until you just go ahead and do them, but marchers are confident enough to act without all the answers and then measure the results as they go. One famous example of this is Interface, the world's biggest carpet tile manufacturer. In the mid-90s, the founder, Ray Anderson, had customers asking what Interface was doing for the environment. He found he didn't have much to say. But this simple question set off a chain reaction that convinced Ray that sustainability was the right thing to do. Interface started investing in efficiency, cutting their waste and saving energy. But Ray realized it would take a lot more than that. Ray got everyone in the company involved. Together, they defined their vision of sustainability. The company's goal was that one day they would take nothing from the earth that the earth could not naturally and rapidly renew and do no harm to the biosphere. Knowing it would be a long journey, they called it Climbing Mount Sustainability and aimed to reach the top by 2020. Without hard data to prove that investments in sustainability would ever pay off, Interface's investors didn't jump at the opportunity, but Interface was willing to take a leap of faith. To eliminate their greenhouse gas emissions at the first Interface factory, they looked at the city's landfill, which was releasing tons of methane, a greenhouse gas 20 times stronger than CO2. It also happened to be an excellent fuel. If they could find a way to harvest that methane, they would eliminate all of their factory's emissions and save money on their energy costs. They couldn't prove for sure that it would pay off, but their research convinced them that it was likely enough to go ahead. Sure enough, they not only got enough methane to fuel their plant, but enough to sell to other factories, easily paying off their investment. By eliminating the city's main source of methane emissions, their factory became carbon neutral. As if that weren't enough, they were also able to sell carbon neutral carpets, which became a surprise hit with customers. With this momentum behind them, they were ready to attempt something that had never been done before, taking the old carpet piling up in landfills and recovering the materials to turn it back into new carpet, closing the loop. They had to invent all the technologies to do it, but today 40% of Interface's carpet is made out of old carpet or biomaterials. Their waste and greenhouse gas emissions are a quarter of what they were when they started their journey. This goes for all their plants, including the new one in China. Cost savings alone are not enough to explain the full value that Interface has achieved through sustainability. As Ray puts it, the goodwill in the marketplace has been astonishing. As Interface has continued its 17-year climb at Mount Sustainability, the company's profits have tripled. The evidence is showing that companies who integrate sustainability into their core strategy get a lot more from their investments than companies that only tiptoe in that direction. 2/3 of the marchers say they are profiting from their investments in sustainability. Even more of them report they are beating the competition. So we see that it is possible to prosper through sustainability. And not only that, it's becoming necessary just to be competitive in business. Sustainability is not a trend. It's always been about the survival of people on this planet. And now it's becoming necessary for the survival of business too. All of this has happened because companies are made of people, employees, citizens, and consumers. And as people, we want to believe that tomorrow will be better than today. So where will the journey of sustainable business take us? The marchers are showing us the way. From where we are today, we can see there's only one direction to go. We hope that you too can help lead the way.
Let us discuss some implication for business. It has become a cliche that environmental problems are substantial and that economic growth contributes to them. A common response is stricter environmental regulation, which often inhibits growth. The result can be a trade-off between a healthy environment on the one hand and healthy growth on the other. As a consequence, opportunities for business may be constrained. However, there are some forms of development that are both environmentally and socially sustainable. They lead not to a trade-off but to an improved environment, together with development that does not draw down our environmental capital. This is what sustainable development is all about, a revolutionary change in the way we approach these issues. What are the practical considerations? While business traditionally seeks precision and practically as a basic for its planning efforts, sustainable development is a concept that is not amenable to simple and universal definition. The role of business in contributing to sustainable development remains indefinite. While all business enterprises can make a contribution towards its attainment, the ability to make a difference varies by sector and organization size. Some executives consider the principal objective of business to be making money. Others recognize a broader social role. There is no consensus among business leaders as to the best balance between narrow self-interest and actions taken for the good of society.
My name's Andy Hall and I live in the Netherlands. I'm a materials scientist and engineer and have spent most of my professional career in product development. I work at Sustainable Value Cycle Solutions, and here's my idea to screw business as usual. Consumer goods companies are fully focused on the targets of revenue and business growth. But it's widely recognized that constant innovation is needed to realize these targets. What's often forgotten is there's an important step between innovation and revenue, and that is the creation of value. This is what the customer recognizes and is prepared to spend money on. It's also of note that the best performing companies are the ones that not only create shareholder value, but stakeholder value. So designing for value drives this whole process. But there's a problem with this formula for business success. If this success formula is used in our current take, make and dispose economy, this just leads to an accelerated depletion of resources and more stuff coming onto the market, which ultimately gets dumped or burned. And that's not a sustainable situation in any shape or form. Screw that. So how can we modify this success formula to make it sustainable? We can add sustainability to our innovation drivers, and we can change the economy from linear to circular. But we don't have a circular economy, I hear you shout. It doesn't matter. You can get the benefits today. How? Here's 4 steps to get started. Step 1. Communicate the concept simply. Instead of looking at a product life cycle, we look at a value life cycle. Value sourcing and creation in the product, and then value collection and recovery in the materials. That's it. And anyone can get that, right? Step 2. Design value products for the system. Great products with an added consumer benefit. What if the coffee machine also purified the water or added a small dose of vitamins? Step 3. Use only trustful and recoverable materials. These are materials where the source is known, the content is known, and they are suitable for the usage application. The recoverability must be both technically and commercially available, and the next product life has been thought about. Step 4. Design the products with the idea that the consumer is not the king or the boss, but your best friend. All designs have a consequence, so make sure yours is the health and happiness of your best friend. It will make you feel good and others proud of you. In doing more good instead of less bad, you will actually enrich everybody's lives. And here are the immediate benefits. Great products that really do what we want them to do, lower costs through better design and value recovery, elimination of toxins and waste, delighted customers, brand image enhancement, and improved employee engagement. And that is the multi-stakeholder value that leads to revenue and business growth we're all looking for. And by the way, did I mention that it's sustainable?
Positive science of change. This positive change in attitudes and practices is echoed by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which says there is now a realistic prospect of harmonizing environmental and economic consideration, and thus of gradually incorporating these objectives in policy. Let us discuss about enhancing management system. The concept of sustainable development needs to be incorporated into the policies and processes of a business if it is to follow sustainable development principle. This does not mean that new management methods need to be invented. Rather, it requires a new cultural orientation and extensive refinements to systems, practices and procedure. The 2 main areas of the management system that must be changed are those concerned with a greater accountability to non-traditional stakeholders, continuous improvement of reporting practices, developing an effective management framework for sustainable development requires addressing both decision making and governance. The concept of sustainable development must be integrated both into business planning and into management information and control system. The steps that are required for managing an enterprise according to sustainable development principles are given below. Perform a stakeholder analysis. A stakeholder analysis is required in order to identify all the parties that are directly or indirectly affected by the enterprise operations. It sets out the issues, concerns, and information needs of the stakeholders with respect to the organization's sustainable development activities. The stakeholder analysis begins by identifying the various groups affected by the business activities. These include shareholders, creditors, regulators, employees, customers, suppliers, and the community in which the enterprise operates. It must also include people who are affected or who consider themselves affected by the enterprise effect on the biosphere and on social capital. After the stakeholders have been identified, management should prepare a description of the needs and expectation that these groups have. After the stakeholders have been identified, management should prepare a description of the needs and expectation that these groups have. They should set out both current and future needs in order to capture sustainable development concept. The key is to analyze how the organization activities affect each of stakeholders, either positively or negatively. The stakeholder analysis may reveal conflicted expectation. For example, customer may demand a new environmental safe products, while employees might be concerned that such policy could threaten their jobs. Set sustainable development policies and objectives. The next objective is to articulate the basic values that the enterprise expects its employees to follow with respect to sustainable development and to set targets for operating performance. Senior management is responsible for formulating a sustainable development policy for its organization and for establishing specific objectives. Drafting a policy statement that is both inspirational and capable of influencing behavior is a challenging task. However, the benefits justify the effort. An effective external monitoring system is necessary for directors and senior management in order to ensure that sustainable development policies, objectives, and management systems are appropriate for the complex and rapidly changing world in which their business operates. Information should be gathered on key subjects including new and proposed legislation, industry practices and standards, competitors' strategies, community and special interest group policies and activities, trade union concerns, technical developments such as new process technologies. For many enterprises, monitoring and influencing external development means becoming more actively involved in the public policy process. A commitment to sustainable development involves helping to formulate policies that shape external developments so that industry-wide sustainable development objectives are achieved. This external monitoring can be integrated into a firm's strategic management process or else carried out as a separate exercise. Some corporations have social policy committees whose scope covers sustainable development issues. Others have environmental committees with a narrower focus. Now moving further, let's talk about design and execute an implementation plan. It is important to draw up a plan for the management system changes that are needed in order to achieve sustainable development objectives. Translating sustainable development policies into operational terms is a major undertaking that will affect the entire organization. It involves changing the corporate culture and employee attitudes, defining responsibility and accountability, and establishing organizational structures, information reporting systems, and operational practices. As a starting point, after the board and senior management have established their sustainable development objectives, these should be communicated to the various stakeholder groups. Some organizations have ongoing consultation arrangement with stakeholders which facilitates this process. There's little point in embarking on a program to meet stakeholders' needs without first consulting stakeholders to ascertain what those needs are. Business planning process should be modified to reflect the sustainable development priorities the expanded stakeholders consultation process and external monitoring needs. Management information systems should be enhanced. In order to ensure that management and employees receive the information, they need to assess their performance against the objectives. Marketing activities should consider customers' needs regarding sustainability. This will require changes to the organization market research efforts. A successful implementation plan depends on rethinking the corporation. If it is to respond to the paradigm shift associated with sustainable development, it is important to address not only the positive forces for change, but also barriers and sources of resistance. So how to develop a supportive corporate culture? Let us discuss over that now. In order to ensure that the organization and its people give their backing to the sustainable development policies, an appropriate corporate culture is essential. In the process of implementing sustainable development or environmental management policies, many companies have experienced a kind of organizational renewal. The increased participation of employees not only generates practical ideas but also increases enthusiasm for the program itself. Most customers and employees enjoy being a part of an organization that is committed to operating in a socially responsible manner. Implementing sustainable development objectives will probably require managers to change their attitudes. This may be accomplished only after retraining. The concept of sustainable development requires organization to develop a culture that emphasizes employee participation, continuous learning and improvement. Internal reporting system can have a significant effect on corporate culture. Equally, it is important that the board provide an oversight and allocation of responsibilities for sustainable development objectives. This umbrella role should include ensuring that responsibilities are assigned in a manner that holds key executives accountable. It also means ensuring that reward and promotion system recognize those people who achieve or help to achieve sustainable development objectives. Now we will discuss about developing measures and standards of performance. The implementation of sustainable development objectives and the preparation of meaningful reports on performance requires appropriate means of measuring performance. Management control as well as external reporting depends on part on the availability of timely information about company operation. This is needed in order to allow management to assess performance against external and internal performance standard using appropriate performance measure. Information system will therefore need to be reviewed to enable the necessary reports to be provided to management. The measures used to assess and report on performance will be influenced by the company's sustainable development objectives and by standards that have been established by government and other public agencies. There is a significant opportunity for the business sector to work with governments in establishing performance measures and standards and to help develop reporting and monitoring systems that are cost effective and which meet the needs of both the public and the business. So the next step in the process is to develop meaningful reports for internal management and stakeholders outlining the enterprise sustainable development objectives and comparing performance against them. Directors and senior executives use internal reports to measure performance, make decisions and monitor the implementation of their policies and strategies. Shareholders, creditors, employees and customers as well as the public at large use external corporate reports to evaluate the performance of a corporation and to hold the directors and senior executives accountable for achieving financial, social and environmental objectives. The system needs incentives and reliable information in order to ensure that there are rewards for positive action. It is ironic that business activity which destroy habitats and pollutes air, land and water produces income and contributes to gross national product. Decision makers within businesses and governments needs a more relevant reporting system. A system that provides a meaningful picture of a company's sustainability achievements is essential for strengthening accountability. This is necessary if an effective relationship is to be maintained with stakeholder groups. Internally, Several companies now ask their line managers to include in their regular reporting procedure a statement on whether they have achieved the environmental and sustainable development targets. Every business enterprise should publish at least once a year an external sustainable development report. Ultimately, a universal format for such reports will be desirable. In the meantime, managers and boards of directors should decide on the organization and content of reports. Let us now discuss about the monitoring process. On an ongoing basis, it will be important to develop mechanisms to help directors and senior managers ensure that the sustainable development policies are being implemented. Performance monitoring is well established as an important element of the management process. In many areas, it is directly linked to reporting. The key to any system effectiveness is whether the management monitors operation and outputs on an ongoing basis. Monitoring can take many forms, such as reviewing reports submitted by middle managers, touring operating sites and observing employees performing their duties, holding regular meetings with subordinates to review reports and to seek input on how the procedures and reporting systems might be improved, implementing an environmental auditing program. Organizing internal environmental audit is a practical way to monitor the implementation of management policies. Let us move to our next topic, management leadership. Establishing sustainable development objective systems and monitoring mechanism requires leadership on the part of senior management and a commitment to continuous improvement. The role of the board: without the active involvement of the board of directors, it will be difficult for an organization to implement sustainable business practices. Corporations are encouraged to establish a social responsibility committee responsible for setting corporate policies on sustainable development and for dealing with issues such as health and safety, personal policies, environmental protection, and codes of business conduct. It is important that corporate sustainable development policies be implemented consistently throughout an organization. Too many business enterprises observe variable levels of corporate ethics and integrity depending on the country in which they are operating. The board also has a role in monitoring the implementation of its policies. It should receive regular reports on how the policies are implemented and should be accountable to its stakeholders on the company's performance against these policies. Self-assessment. The first step for business in adopting sustainable development principle is to assess their current position. Management should know the degree to which the company's activities line up with sustainable development principle. This requires evaluating the company's overall strategy, the performance of specific operation, and the effect of particular activities. This process should compare the company's current performance with the expectation of the stakeholders, deciding on a strategy. Once managers have gained an understanding of how its own operations shape up, they should gauge the performance of other comparable organizations. Comparison against the standards set by other industries and environmental groups can be instructive. This task should be relatively easy if there is reasonable public disclosure, organized industry association, and cooperative sustainable development program. A general plan is needed to describe how and when management expects to achieve that goal, together with the various milestones it will reach along the way. Senior management should review and approve the strategy and the plan before submitting them to the board of directors for final approval. Strategy implementation. Once the strategy and the general plan have been approved, a detailed plan should be prepared indicating how the new strategy will affect operation, management system, information system, and reporting. These should set out measurable goals to be achieved in each area and explain how progress will be monitored. They should also specify spending and training requirements. These plans should be developed through consultation with employees throughout the organization, possibly with the assistance of outside specialists. Applying the proposed framework will be a challenge for all enterprises, but smaller businesses may encounter additional challenges. Besides sustainability reporting, smaller businesses will have to adapt to the new corporate climate with less in-house expertise. fewer resources and less formal management structure than larger corporations. It will be difficult for them to keep abreast of ever-changing regulatory requirements. Fortunately, small businesses can find much of the expertise they require through industry association, chambers of commerce, corporate environmental groups. There is also a growing body of literature, some of which deals with experiences of companies that have integrated sustainable development into their operations. These cooperative ventures could be more complex and include formal industry programs dealing with matters such as performance standards, monitoring and technological research. Once the expertise and resource issues have been addressed, the generally less formal management structures found in small businesses can be a positive advantage. There will be fewer people to educate within the enterprise and there will usually be less resistance to change. In addition, there are usually no formal committees to whom the new strategies must be sold and no lengthy review and approval procedure to slow the process down. The hands-on management style common to smaller businesses can also aid the monitoring function. Management will be well positioned to spot problems and to make the necessary adjustment. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learned in this lecture. Sustainable development for Shell means balancing short and long-term interests in a way that allows us to integrate economic, environmental and social consideration into the business decision. The role of business in contributing to sustainable development remains indefinite. The global economy is coming under growing pressure to pay for the restoration of damaged environments. The stakeholders analysis begins by identifying the various groups affected by the business's activities. It is important that sustainable development objectives be clear, concise, and wherever possible expressed in measurable terms. Management control as well as external reporting depends in part on the availability of timely information about company operations.